Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this first of 4 series of lectures that will explore various traditions in the world, past and present, in which universal wisdom or Theosophia can be recognized. And if you followed our lectures last season, you may remember that Theosophia as such has existed for a very long time, but that according to that same Theosophia, it has been relevant to us humans for 18 million years, because it was only then that we as humans began to develop the ability to think. In previous lectures, the image presented was that humans are a composite being with an imperishable, enduring part, spirit, a learning part, soul, and a transient, temporary part, the body. And that there is always continuity of consciousness with periods of activity and rest alternating, such as waking and sleeping. But also periods of life or incarnation and periods of rest that we call death. In the previous lecture series in February, a picture was sketched of the process of reincarnation and its cause and effect, and the fact that we take wisdom with us into our subsequent incarnations. And when that inner wisdom is called upon, and we truly have an open mind for it, we can recall elements of it, however vaguely, that we can continue to develop in this life. And through self-directed development, we can increasingly unfold our human potential. We then become more and more ourselves, that is, we become more and more the mystical part of our nature, until in the future we become one with our divine core. The goal of the upcoming 4 lecture series is to demonstrate that throughout the long period of 18 million years in which humanity has been developing its thinking faculty, universal wisdom or Theosophia can consistently be recognized in various traditions, albeit with ups and downs. There are alternating periods when universal wisdom is well understood and refined, and periods of decline of an incorrect or no understanding of it. And of course, we also have to deal with the fact that expressions of this universal wisdom vary across time and place, across language and culture. One of the objectives of the Theosophical Society is to study religions of the past and present, philosophy and science. Therefore, we will do our utmost to translate concepts from these various traditions into concepts used today. In this way, we will make visible the universality of wisdom in the various traditions. In this lecture series, we begin with the universal wisdom of ancient Egypt, because this wisdom is among the oldest in the world and has been very important for the development of knowledge and wisdom in the West. The ancient Egyptians believed in eternal life. The key to understanding the vision of life and death, as found in the Egyptian Book of the Dead and in the function of the Great Pyramid, lies in the mystical, the inner aspect of Egyptian religion. Mysticism is the intuitive awareness of inner higher worlds and the attempt to contact and cooperate with them. This aspect is also found in the writings of the Hermetic tradition based on the books of thought. More on this in the 3rd lecture of this series. But also in contemporary African Ubuntu philosophy, which has its roots in ancient Egypt. What is the value of all this for us today? In this lecture, our goal is to investigate where the ancient Egyptians did get their profound knowledge. We will use esoteric sources such as those found in Theosophical literature, and in doing so, we will sometimes go far back in time, much further back in time than the 5,000 to 6,000 years that most historians assume when using written sources from that period. In this lecture series, you will sometimes encounter the terms the East or mystical East. The meaning of these terms is, in short, esoteric wisdom, esoteric Buddhism with one D, wisdom from before the Vedas, or hidden occult knowledge about the non-material side of nature. And then we are talking about the esoteric wisdom of the fifth evolutionary class of human development, of which we are a part. More on that shortly. The topics of the lecture are as follows. 1. The sources of universal wisdom and the history of Earth and humanity. 2. Where did the ancient Egyptians get their profound knowledge? And 3. The Great Pyramid of Egypt, an introduction. First, we will briefly discuss some basic ideas from Theosophy, the contemporary expression of Theosophia, the universal wisdom. Theosophy is based on the following three fundamental propositions of Theosophia. First, the boundlessness of life, of which all beings are a part. Consequences of this proposition. Everything in the cosmos lives. The universal spiritual unity of all beings and the actual interconnectedness of all beings. Universal brotherhood is a fact. The second proposition. Every being possesses boundless potentials within itself and gradually develops them. Consequences, the fundamental equality of all beings. The development of beings differs. Therefore, there is a spiritual hierarchy in which the wisest inspires. The third proposition. Inner development is cyclical and occurs through collaboration with other beings. Consequences, cyclicity means reincarnation. Inner development is only possible within the totality of life, that is, in interaction with other beings. And also, each being has a composited nature. The three fundamental concepts are intertwined. Universal unity and universal brotherhood are a fact, even if they are not recognized or people do not live according to them. The great challenge is to allow actual unity to play a significant role in our daily thoughts and actions. What does Theosophy say about the origin of the cosmos? When a being, such as a cosmos or a human being, comes into manifestation, it occurs in three phases. In the boundless life, which is the core of every being, represented by a circle, the first vibration of a manifestation arises from an inner urge. A being comes into existence in its most spiritual aspect in preparation for birth. A dot appears within the circle, the zero, as a number, the number 1. But as soon as that one life we are considering manifests, there is actually already 2. It divides into what you might call a masculine and a feminine side. Men and women, spirit and matter, God and goddess. The masculine side is the active, the creative side. The feminine is the symbol of the receptive, the passive side. You could call it spirit and matter. In various mythologies, spirit was depicted as a god, matter as a goddess. Each of these goddesses was depicted as both the sister and spouse of the god. The god and the goddess are brother and sister because both spirit and matter originate from the boundless. Yet, spirit is the father because spirit is the animating and guiding element in matter. Finally, they are also spouses, through the influence of spirit on matter, on the lower level, the sun, the manifested universe is created, the product of spirit and matter. This process repeats itself on various levels, and thus the hierarchy, the structure, the fabric of the universe is created. When a being manifests, there is always a Trinity. For as soon as diversity arises from homogeneity, there is always spirit and matter which create a manifested being. These three elements together form a Trinity: Father, Mother, and Son. We will further illustrate this with some examples. Take the image of a triangle. The three sides of a triangle have three separate lines, but together they form the triangle, the unity. Every being is within itself the Trinity: spirit, body, and the combination of these, the soul. The structure of man and universe is identical. Compare it also to three flames that are one. See also the symbol of the egg in many cultures, such as the world egg in Egyptian culture and the egg of Brahma in Indian culture. As a symbol of procreation, birth, and rebirth, it is the most familiar form of that in which the seed of every living being is laid and developed, says Madame Blavatsky in Isis Unveiled. And it is used not only because of the mystery of its apparent self-creation, but also because of its spherical shape, since both the sphere and the circle are symbols of the seeds encompassing space or sphere. Madame Blavatsky gives the following physical example of the process of creation on Earth. In the soil, the life seeds of plants are present, and with sufficient moisture, these seeds emerge when they receive sufficient warmth from the sun's rays. In short, the father in this example is the sun's rays, the mother is the earth, the soil, and the son are the life seeds in the soil that come to manifestation. Finally, in addition to the symbolism of the numbers 1, 2, and 3, I would briefly touch on the symbolism of the number 4, that of the manifested cosmos. Madame Blavatsky says about this the following: geometrically speaking, the 4 is also the primordial, that is the fundamental, abstract triangle, which abandons its one-dimensional quality so that the universe may manifest intelligently, that is, in a three-dimensional space. Therefore, it is said to unite in itself all the materials of which the universe is composed. We go to the next question. How and when did humanity originate? The consequence of the first fundamental principle is every being has always existed and will always exist. There are no absolute beginnings or endings. Yet, you could say that the beings who are currently developing mind, the faculty to think, that is the typically human faculty, once began to do so. They had already undergone a long period of evolution, during which they traveled through lower kingdoms of nature and learned their lessons there. According to Theosophy, mind was awakened in these beings, that were us, human beings at the time, 18 million years ago. That thinking faculty, mind, manas in Sanskrit, was already latent and was awakened by the stimulating influence of higher beings, the Manasaputras, the sons of mind. Compare it to a young child who, surrounded by adults, after a while cautiously begins to think. According to Theosophy, that process took place through 7 groups of sages on 7 different places on Earth. According to Theosophy, humans are composite beings consisting of 7 principles of consciousness, of which only the 3 highest are imperishable. These are the divine principle from top to bottom, the Buddhi principle, the spiritual principle, manas, the mind, and we have a higher mind and a lower mind, kama, the desire principle, prana, the vitality principle, the linga sarira, the astral body, and the sthula sarira of the physical body. Humans can direct their thoughts and consciousness toward the characteristics of these imperishable parts and increasingly become these higher parts. This evolutionary process can be accelerated, not only gradually, but also through the process of initiation. This is a process of development that the average person completes over hundreds of lifetimes, but which is accomplished in a short time by the initiate. More on this next week when we will explore the mystical side of ancient Egypt. In Theosophy, we assume the living planet Earth. The life of the planet, and therefore also the development of humanity, takes place in 7 phases or 7 rounds, as they are called in Theosophy. This takes a long time, 4,320,000,000 years. In this period, humanity fully develops all 7 principles of consciousness which I just explained to you. From the material principle to the divine principle. We are currently in the 4th phase of life, or 4th round of the planet Earth, in which the desire principle, or karma, is fully developed. In this 4th round, 7 sub-aspects of the desire principle are being developed in 7 subphases, or 7 consecutive classes of human types. In the first phases of the planet's life, humanity was still in a kind of infancy. Human vehicles were being built, but they lacked the faculty of mind. We also see this in the human lifetime. First, the baby's body is built, and only later does the mind become active. All these phases of the planet's life cycle are phases of growth in consciousness. To clearly distinguish the growth phases or classes of consciousness, they have been given the following names in Theosophical literature, starting with the 3rd class in the 4th round. 3rd class is that of the Lemurians, the 4th class that of the Atlanteans, and the 5th class, the current stage, sometimes named after one of the first branches, the Aryans. And remember, in all classes, we ourselves were and are it in an early phase as humans many lives ago. The awakening of the mind occurred in the middle of the 3rd class of the current 4th round, in the Lemurian era, some 18 million years ago. How did this occur? Theosophy speaks of the descent into our plane of consciousness of the Manasaputras, the sons of mind, who awakened the mind in the people of that time. It happened much like your inspiring high school teacher awakened enthusiasm, idealism, and insights in you. They are, from our perspective, divine beings who were humans during a previous incarnation of our planet Earth. The secret doctrine speaks of the golden age when the gods walked the earth and interacted freely with the mortals of that time. All traditions worldwide speak of 7 groups of divine sages or teachers, referred to as serpents or dragons of wisdom, from whom a whole series of human teachers always emerged. Examples of names for these divine teachers include Thoth, Hermes, Osiris, Enoch, Cadmus, and Orpheus, and others. And when the teacher died, the student took over their task and often their name as well. Humanity then further developed during the 4th class, that of the Atlanteans. When material design began to dominate human thought and selfishness increased, the wisdom of the Manasaputras could no longer be openly shared. Humanity had entered a new cycle and approached the deepest point of its material development halfway through this 4th class of the 4th round. From that most material point, some 4 to 5 million years ago, the mystery schools were founded by the hierarchy of compassion. The wisdom of the gods, or Theosophia, had to be protected by the seclusion of these mystery schools. Theosophia was taught only in secret to those who were suitable. All the great world religions, philosophical traditions, and sciences have their origins in these mystery schools. We are currently in the 5th class of the 4th round. Our thinking faculty has therefore been active for several classes. The culture of Atlantis, the 4th class, began to decline after its peak some 4.5 million years ago. That was also the time when the 5th class of human development began to have its beginnings. Atlantis was then a much larger landmass than the present-day land masses, and was divided into continents separated by shallow and deep seas. It stretched across the Atlantic and parts of the Pacific Ocean. When the decline of the Atlantean culture began, parts of the land of Atlantis gradually began to sink underwater. Madame Blavatsky mentions, among other things, the sinking of the last large piece of land in the Pacific Ocean called Ruta, which occurred 850,000 years ago. After that, a smaller piece of land called Daitya sank about 400,000 years ago. And finally, 11 to 12,000 years ago, the island of Poseidonus, the size of modern-day Ireland, also mentioned by Plato, sank. According to legend, it sank in 1 day and 1 night. As an increasing portion of the Atlantic continent submerged, new lands emerged, including Asia and Europe west of the Urals, and parts of America and Africa. From Atlantis, people who were part of the wise and compassionate centers in Atlantis primarily migrated eastward to newly formed lands and settled there. They brought with them their knowledge and wisdom from Atlantis. Asia was then still a relatively low-lying land with many inland seas. later the geography and climate would change through the phased rise of land and become what we know today. The migrants settled in Central Asia. The cradle of the fifth class of humanity was therefore in Central Asia, a vast area including Iran, Afghanistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Mongolia, Northwest China, and Tibet. From this cradle, various spiritual impulses have emerged. There was a time when this area, now largely a wasteland, was covered with a succession of highly developed civilizations, based on their knowledge and wisdom from Atlantis. It was from the northern parts of the Central Asian cradle that those peoples who called themselves Aryans later descended into the Indian Peninsula, and almost simultaneously a people arrived from the south, from what remained of the ancient Atlantic landmass of Lanka, of which now only the northernmost headland, Sri Lanka, exists. The inhabitants of Lanka were called Rakshasas by the Indians and later Eastern Ethiopians by the Greeks because of their dark skin. Madame Blavatsky notes that India is sometimes referred to as the cradle of civilization, but she then points out that this refers to the very earliest civilizations in Asia of the fifth class. And by India we must then understand a vast area in Asia. Furthermore, from Central Asia, various peoples began to migrate in all directions, especially westward to the almost upland regions of Europe. For example, from the southeastern regions of Central Asia came, even later, the Babylonians, Assyrians, Medes and Persians, and the peoples of Europe, the Greeks and the Romans. Now we move on to the second topic of today. We are going to focus on Egypt. And we will especially address the question, where did the ancient Egyptians get their profound knowledge? Besides settling in Central Asia, migrants from the remaining Atlantic islands traveled eastward and settled on new lands that have risen from the ocean, including the emerging African continent. These new landmasses formed, among other things, what are now the Abyssinian highlands and the lands north of them. We are talking about Egypt in the making. The first wave of immigrants from Atlantis was of the earliest Atlantean origins, from what would later be called the archaic Egyptians. As you probably know, Egypt is called the gift of the Nile. This is because the Nile Delta was formed by enormous accumulations of sediment transported from the interior of Africa. The first immigrants of an ancient, primitive Atlantean origin arrived in Egypt approximately 400,000 years ago and settled on the Abyssinian highlands and slightly to the north. These immigrants brought with them their then existing knowledge from Atlantis. Much later, the original Nile Delta was repopulated by Atlantean immigrants from a remnant of Atlantis, Poseidonus, some 80,000 to 100,000 years ago. By then, they had already more or less intermingled with the Aryans, the new fifth class of humanity, who had come centuries ago from the highlands of Asia, where they had sought refuge during the sinking of parts of Atlantis. Now, the immigrants from Poseidonus were the builders of the Great Pyramid of Egypt. Pyramid building was, incidentally, characteristic of peoples of Atlantean origin. This can also be seen, for example, in Central America at the pyramids of the Sun and the Moon in Teotihuacan in Mexico. About 8,000 to 9,000 and even longer, 11,000 years ago, Egypt was again invaded and colonized, this time by immigrants from South India and Lanka. They followed two routes, across the Indian Ocean to the Abyssinian highlands, Ethiopia, and surrounding lands, and then down the Nile, and over land through the Sinai Desert. Egyptian documents refer to these immigrants as the Schizohor, the sons of Horus, who came from the east. They were also called the Eastern Ethiopians. They were a mixed people of an early Aryan lineage, but with an even stronger influence from the ancient Atlanteans of Lanka. They interbred with the earlier Atlantean Egyptians, resulting in the composite people that gave rise to the dynasties of Egypt. Blavatsky says that the Ethiopians of the East, who originated from Lanka or Ceylon, were a colony of very dark-skinned Dravidians from South India, who brought with them to Egypt a pre-existing spiritual civilization, before the later unification of Upper and Lower Egypt by Pharaoh Menes around 3100 BC. The wisdom of Indian civilization included the Vedas. The word Vedas can be defined as divine knowledge. The Vedas are the oldest and holiest of all Sanskrit literature. The Vedas have multiple authors, but were compiled in their current form by Vyasa some 5,100 years ago. However, their origins lie in remote antiquity in Tibet. They were at least 25,000 years old and probably even older. So, the third wave of immigration to Egypt brought the divine knowledge of the Vedas from India. Most knowledge about Egypt comes starting from around 3100 BC, the time of Pharaoh Mene, due to the availability of written messages. From at least 3100 to around 300 BC, Egypt had a very high profile in the world because it possessed very ancient knowledge and wisdom. Mythologies tell of dynasties of divine pharaohs and mystery schools such as those of Thebes, Memphis, Heliopolis, Sais, Abydos, Luxor, and Karnak, where the greatest of the sacred mysteries were preserved. All the esoteric knowledge from the Middle East and India regarding the spiritual side of life was known in the Egyptian mystery schools. And we have just seen how this came about. This esoteric knowledge was expressed in the lesser mysteries, such as in the myths, the pyramid texts, the coffin texts, and the books of the dead, which contained knowledge about the afterlife and the processes of initiation. And in the so-called greater mysteries, where suitable candidates for initiation could gain first-hand experience in other realms of existence. See next week's lecture on the Great Pyramid and the Book of the Dead. The knowledge and wisdom of ancient Egypt had already been written down for many centuries, such as the books of thought, also known as the Hermetic writings, which were unfortunately almost entirely destroyed centuries later. We will discuss this with you in 2 weeks from now. During and after Egypt's heyday, various brotherhoods preserved esoteric knowledge and wisdom. Some of these brotherhoods have continued to exist until our time. For example, 2 of their masters were involved in the preparations before founding of the Theosophical Society in the 19th century. And from Egypt, masters were active in the rest of Africa, spreading this wisdom on this continent. In the final lecture, we will discuss the contemporary Ubuntu philosophy which emerged from this. The knowledge and wisdom present in ancient Egypt were also reflected in the high-level knowledge of architecture, hydraulic engineering, mathematics and physics, astronomy, alchemy, medicine, agriculture, etc. This knowledge was already present in ancient Egypt from the earliest dynasties. Important classical Greek thinkers such as Pythagoras and Plato went to Egypt for education. Yet, the Egyptians were otherwise a common people. But they were a very religious people, where religion always played an important role in daily life. The Greek historian Herodotus already described this in the 5th century BC. The mystery schools of Egypt gradually declined, and esoteric knowledge was increasingly lost. We will now look at the basic ideas in the culture of ancient Egypt. What vision did they have? And can the ideas of theosophy be recognized in them? Which teachers did they have? An important starting point is that the Egyptians assumed the eternity of consciousness of the human being. We will now first compare a number of important theosophical principles with Egyptian basic thoughts. First, again, the boundlessness of life. This idea can be found in the thousands of years old papyrus of Orbinet, which contains the following Egyptian hymn. The gods adore thee, they greet thee, O the one dark truth. Thinking about this one dark truth could only take the form of negation, that of an unknown essence. Thus they called that which we call the boundless principle of life. It was not spoken of, too abstract and too sacred. The second basic thought, the essential equivalence of all life, that everything is alive and essentially equivalent, and part of the spiritual unity of life, was expressed in the myths about the origins of the cosmos and humanity. These myths appeal to intuition. The cosmos and humanity emerge from a hierarchy of divine, personified powers and energy represented by the hierarchy of gods. It essentially concerns the characteristics of the 7 principles of consciousness, which we can also recognize in ourselves. And as just explained with the concept of the spiritual Trinity, the distinction was made between the conscious side, referred to as masculine, the gods, and the material side, referred to as feminine, the goddesses. In Egyptian thought, spiritual unity, based on this concept of the one dark truth, is expressed primarily in mythology by the goddess Maat, who represents truth, balance, and cosmic order. From this concept emerged the idea that humans have a duty to maintain harmony in their lives and communities, reflecting the divine order and harmony of the cosmos. and strangely for us, different gods often took center stage in each different city. This was partly because different temples had a different focus of knowledge, for example, on the cosmos or on the solar system, on the earth or on humanity, and placed their own emphasis on science, philosophy, and religion, respectively. The different levels in the hierarchy of gods are linked to the origins of the different levels of the cosmos, earth, and humanity. Then the third basic idea, cyclicity. According to the ancient Egyptians, the soul was immortal and appears and disappears with the daily returning solar boat of the god Ra. The soul joins the living during the day and returns each night to the underworld called Duat, Chow of Amenti. This idea expresses the cyclicity of life, including the idea of reincarnation. We also see the idea of reincarnation in the Egyptian symbol of the scarab beetle called Khepera. This name is derived from the verb kopron, which means to become, to build again. But note, the idea of reincarnation was kept secret within the walls of the mystery schools. To give an idea of the main outlines of mythology, I will very briefly give a few fragments as examples. The first phase of creation, the most abstract one, the cosmic phase, had the god Tem or Atum as the highest god, the self-created divine being. In the city of Memphis, the god Ptah stood at this location. And the material aspect is represented by the goddess Nun, space, the celestial waters. The second phase of creation is about the solar system. We see the sun god Ra, born of Tem and Nun. One of the other names for Ra is Khepera. Its symbol is the scarab beetle. The third phase of creation is that of the planet Earth and humanity. In mythology, Osiris is the god of the underworld, and Osiris symbolizes the inner divine nature of man. Isis is the sister and wife of Osiris and mother of their son Horus, as part of the spiritual Trinity. The fourth phase of creation is that of humanity. Horus is the falcon god, the son of Osiris and Isis. He symbolizes man, and in particular, the higher mind of man, Buddhimanas called in Sanskrit, the inner Buddha or Christ, symbolized by the heart. Osiris is the opponent of Set, his brother, who symbolizes the lower nature. Now something about cosmogenesis. In the esoteric explanation of the cosmogony of ancient Egypt, we see the universal concept of the Trinity or Triad of Osiris, Isis, and Horus playing a significant role. And this is true at two different levels. At the level of the cosmos, the cosmic triad, called the older Osiris, Isis, and Horus, and at the level of the earth and humanity, called the younger Osiris, Isis, and Horus. First, the older Osiris, Isis, and Horus. In that case, Osiris signifies the cosmic intelligence, the idea of the cosmos. Isis represents the spirit of love and compassion that expresses itself in the sphere of the cosmos within which all cosmic beings can manifest. And Horus, their son, is the so-called demiurge, the creator and renewer, the supreme being who manifests first. Then, the meaning of the younger Osiris, Isis, and Horus was an earthly triad. This is a reflection of the cosmic triad. These were the younger Osiris, Isis, and Horus, who in ancient Egyptian theology were specifically associated with our Earth. Osiris was one of the 7 solar logoi or solar forces emanating from the spiritual sun. Isis was the counterpart of that younger Osiris, that which manifests on earth as a spiritual mental sphere and expresses itself in the human heart as sympathy, love, and compassion. Horus is their son, the renewer within humanity, the enlightened, higher thinking faculty. Then we will have a look at the anthropogenesis. The ancient Egyptians believed that humans descended from the gods and that humans are therefore potentially divine. They knew the 7 principles of consciousness, and you see here the table with the Theosophical names, with the principles, and also with the corresponding Egyptian names. And you can view the Trinity of Osiris, Isis, and Horus as corresponding to our own immortal core, which builds a new body with each rebirth. You can describe this as follows. You can use words like Atman for Osiris, the principle of unity that continuously emanates inspiration, Buddhi for Isis, the principle of wisdom that can shape inspiration into a sphere of images, and Manas for Horus, the principle of thought or mind that can translate these images into practical and logical plans and actions. Finally, the idea that the inner core of man is identical to the god Osiris indicates the mystical side of Egyptian religion. We will dive more into that next week. But we will now go to the last and third topic of today, which is an introduction to the Great Pyramid. We will discuss as an example the advanced knowledge of the builders of the Great Pyramid regarding the physical and mental world they had knowledge about. The Great Pyramid has always been a symbol of the advanced knowledge and skills that was apparently present in ancient Egypt. It is known as one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world and is called the Pyramid of Pharaoh Cheops or Khnum Khufu. It is dated by Egyptologists to approximately 2600 BC. The Great Pyramid raises many questions, such as who built it, when was it built, how was it built, why was it built, for what purpose. Due to time constraints, we will only discuss today the first 3, the who, when, and how, by considering the physical characteristics, especially of the outside, which gives an impression of the knowledge and skills of the builders. The why, the purpose of the Great Pyramid, we will focus on next week, when we will consider the inside and the symbolism of the various spaces within the pyramid. This gives an impression of the builder's inner knowledge and wisdom concerning human consciousness and the cosmos. We will then consider that it wasn't not built as a tomb, but it is connected to the processes of death and initiation. Let's go to the first question. By who was it built according to Theosophy? The answer is by the immigrants from Atlantis from Poseidonus. When was the Great Pyramid built? Madame Blavatsky uses the so-called zodiac of Dendera as an indication of its age. The Dendera zodiac gives a representation of the sky 3 precessions backward, and the precession movement is the spinning motion of the Earth axis, which takes about 26,000 years for one such a spinning motion. According to astronomy experts, the zodiac of the temple at Dendera depicts the constellation of stars approximately 3 precessions back, that is 3 times 26,000 is 78,000 years ago, compared to the time of Pharaoh Cheops, which lived about 2600 BC. And ancient historical records also reveal that the zodiac was also found in the tomb of an Egyptian pharaoh thousands of years earlier. If we assume that the creators of the Dendera zodiac depicted the positions of the stars in their time, and that they had a high level of knowledge of astronomy, then it is equally reasonable to conclude that the Great Pyramid was built by people from a culture that existed well over 80,000 years ago, thus by people who populated Egypt only 4,600 years ago. Then we go to the next question: how was the Great Pyramid built? We will now first explore the Great Pyramid in general terms by reviewing some facts and looking at slides of the exterior. This knowledge, which I will present now, is also partly derived from the 20th and 21st century researchers such as Robert Bauval, John West, and Patrick James. We will look at a few selected details of its construction. Some of these details involve knowledge of mathematics and physics, which you may not have a broad background in, but that's no problem. This is simply meant to illustrate the level of knowledge of the builders. From this, it will become clear that these are profound ideas enshrined in stone. So here we have a first picture of the Great Pyramid. It has enormous dimensions. The base is 230 by 230 meters, and the height is 146 meters. The exterior was once covered with white limestone, and that gave a reflection of sunlight on very long distances by working as a mirror. The detail of the stones are also very interesting. Science says that the measurements are very accurate of the stones. The number is 2,300,000 stones, with an average weight of 2.5 tons, and the total weight is 6.5 million tons. The joints between the stones are very precise. You can, in some cases, not even put a razor blade in between them. The construction of the Great Pyramid is, according to Theosophy, that it was partly built by people of a different type than we now know of. That is, that there were people with a greater length. The stones were cut by human hands in the stone quarries and placed in the pyramid using white magic. Research by rock scientists shows that the stones come from 20 different quarries, sometimes located at very big distances, let's say some 1,000 kilometers from Gizeh, where the pyramid is located. There are 20 types of dimensions of stones. They are very smooth and jointed before, generally speaking, suitable tools existed to make such stones. And also the structure is remarkable. No, there is no layering can be seen in the stones as found in the stones in the quarry. The fossil shells in the Great Pyramid stones have a random orientation in the stones, while they are layered in the quarries. Now we come to a few mathematical things. First, the principle that is known in mathematics as the squaring of the circle. If we look at the circumference of the base, which is 4 times 230 meters, then it turns out that the height times 2 times pi is equal to the circumference of the base. This, while it is assumed that the number of pi was only known in Greece in the 3rd century BC. Another feature is the occurrence of the golden ratio, which is 1.618 and many ciphers, because the golden ratio is the basis for the growth processes in nature. If you make a perpendicular section of the two sides, then you can see that the two sides, the hypotenuse and the horizontal side, have a ratio of the golden ratio section. Then the location of the Great Pyramid is also very remarkable. The top of the pyramid is located at exactly 29.97 and then a number of digits of degrees at north latitude. And remarkably, this number sequence corresponds to the number sequence for the speed of light measured on Earth, as we can do that nowadays. And this knowledge about the speed of light is a development of only the past few centuries, and also the measuring techniques are also of a relatively young age. Then there is another very remarkable feature, and it turns out that the Great Pyramid is a scale model of the Earth. From the dimensions of the pyramid, it can be deduced that the Great Pyramid represents a scale model in the scale of 1 to 43,200. How can we understand this? If you take the dimensions of the pyramid, dimensions of the base, and the height of the pyramid, and you multiply these by the number 43,200, then the pyramid fits within the hemisphere of the northern hemisphere with great accuracy. It is remarkable that it also takes into account the fact that the Earth is not entirely spherical, but is somewhat flattened at the poles. I will leave the details of this aside for the moment. Incidentally, you can find in Theosophy that the numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4 are numbers that typify the structure and processes in the cosmos. For instance, the average human heart rate is approximately 72 beats per minute, which is 34,320 beats per hour. At the equator, day and night are of equal length, namely 43,200 seconds. According to Theosophy, the Earth's life cycle is 4,320,000,000 years. So these numbers keep coming back. Also, the chambers in the Great Pyramid have a resonant frequency of 432 Hz for sound, which resonates with the Earth's natural frequency of 8 Hz. Astronomy. The Great Pyramid lies within a zone where solar eclipses occur, on average once every 100 years. You can see that on the NASA map, the blue stripe running across Egypt. And this was important at the time due to the initiation processes took place in the Great Pyramid. In summary and conclusion, Egyptian culture derived its profound knowledge and wisdom from two waves of immigration from Atlantis and one more recent from South India. The basic principles of the culture of ancient Egypt are identical to those of Theosophica and were taught in the various mystery schools. The advanced knowledge is illustrated, among other things, by the remarkable facts concerning the construction of the Great Pyramid. Next week, we will discuss the interior of the Great Pyramid when we discuss the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. We will now conclude the lecture and we will have a break of 3 minutes. After that, after discussing the questions, there will be a study of approximately 30 minutes. And if you want to join the study, you are requested to send an email to info@blavatskyhouse.org and you will be sent the link to participate in the study. We are going to have a break of 3 minutes now and see you back after the break. Thank you. Welcome back. Jenny, are there any questions?
No, there are no questions.
No
So
questions.
I think we are looking forward for the study.
Yeah, okay. So then we need some time to switch over, I think. We will now close the study. We will have next week the lecture on the mystical relationship between the Great Pyramid and the Egyptian Book of the Dead. And we will close our meeting with the reading of the Gayatri mantra from the Rig Veda. And it runs as follows. O thou golden sun of most excellent splendor, illumine our hearts and fill our minds so that we, recognizing our oneness with the divinity, which is the heart of the universe, may see the pathway before our feet and tread it to those distant goals of perfection, stimulated by thine own radiant light.